Friday the 13th the game was a title made with passionate developers, backed by thousands of fans and enjoyed by many, but it was forcefully shut down and left to rot, which now sits in the hands of modders, hackers and hopeless players who just want to enjoy the remnants of what it once was. But before we start digging its grave, let's go back to the roots of this dead tree to see what actually happened and where it all came from. Debuting in May 9th, 1980, Friday the 13th was shown on the big screen, featuring a series of counsellors watching over a child on the famous Camp Crystal Lake in the most 80s depiction of America there is. Due to being diagnosed with a case of the down bad syndrome, the campus neglect and abuse towards this young boy results in him drowning. After the incident had occurred, the campsite was closed, but when the counsellors tried to reopen the grounds years later, the boy's mother, blind with rage, led to some of the first few kills in the franchise, all by the hand of this woman now known as Pamela Voorhees, who is killed off by the end of the film by Alice, one of the surviving campers, by beheading her with a machete. But why Friday the 13th? What date is the significance to this film? Before the name was actually decided, it was originally going to be named A Long Night on Camp Blood, slightly uninspired and a little on the nose. Might as well throw in sex and mother issues in the same name too, just to really sell it. But the reason for Friday the 13th is mostly speculated to have been based on the Christian superstition that the number 13 harbours unluckiness, because in biblical storytelling, Judas, the 13th disciple, was the one to betray Christ. But now in the modern day, due to the popularity of the films, the reason people think Friday the 13th is unlucky is because of the movie. The pilot spawned a sequel depicting the reanimated body of Pamela's son Jason, killing in the same fashion of his mother, but this time with inhuman strength, all whilst clothed in farmer attire and his face covered in an old potato sack, making any ounce of humanity hard to grasp under all that fabric. It also looks slightly racist, but it's not pointy enough, so I'm going to let it slide. But clan antics aside, if anything, Jason doesn't discriminate, unless you're involved in the beheading of his mother, or better yet, if you're bound to a wheelchair, which poor Mark here was unfortunate enough to be, as after a slick machete to the face, he proceeds to almost outdo John Wick in the amount of stairs he flew down after taking a mighty blow. Speaking of a mighty blow, the other counsellors keep to the Friday the 13th tradition and get hot and steamy at any given moment whilst being skewered or stabbed by the pillowcase psycho. Then after the success from the first two movies, Jason finally dons his famous look, the hockey mask. The usual recipe is here, however not changing much from the two previous movies, sex and murder. Arguably, however, due to the increase in budget from the franchise-wide success, it's almost obnoxious how obviously the directors wanted you to know that 3D cinema is possible with a ton of unnecessary in-your-face camera shots, whilst even including some prop bodies for the more gruesome kills. I mean, even for the 1980s, there's no way anyone took that seriously. I'm pretty sure I could show this kill to like my little brother or an ape in the zoo and they'd go, yeah, that's fake. What did they actually do with the money? Regardless of what they did with the actual budget in terms of the film, the one thing they did do was create one of the biggest slasher horror icons ever made, alongside the likes of the older Michael Myers or the newer ones like Freddy Krueger and Ghostface. 9 movies later, Jason had amounted over 200 kills, been to hell, been to space, and worst of all, Manhattan. A lot of these films actually just showcase new versions and looks for Jason Voorhees. 2 of the movies actually just don't even have him in it. There's a guy that pretends to be him, because why have the real thing when you can have a guy pretending to be him? And yeah, it's a questionable movie choice because no one watches Friday the 13th for the plot. At least I didn't. When 1989 swung around, the same year the 8th film was published, so too did the first ever Friday the 13th video game. It had beautiful cover art, cartridges, and even more so colourful gameplay. Now confined to 8-bit, Mr. Voorhees looks even snazzier, in bright purple and a sleek cyan, something that I definitely would not be heavily inspired by 35 years later. But more importantly, people could now get a first-hand experience combating the violent force themselves. On the Nintendo Entertainment System, it was truly a commercial year for Friday the 13th. As not only did the game and movie release, Jason appeared on talk shows whilst trying to promote all of the new releases.
The term deranged sociopath gets thrown around a lot by the media, but it really applies to my next guest. Starting today, you can see him in Friday the 13th, Part 8. Jason Takes Manhattan. Please welcome Jason.
You killed 16 people
and you were responsible for the death of 8 others. Total, that's less than what you usually kill in a movie. Are you getting soft? Are you losing a step?
Developed by LGN, a game came out on the NES called Friday the 13th. Except, no it wasn't. The game did come out, that is a real thing, but it wasn't developed by LGN. The thing is, whilst the logo for LGN is slapped onto the software loading screens, Atlus was actually responsible for the development side of things. As much as LGN has claimed to publish this game, they're not even a game-making company. They're not even a game publishing company. They make toys. They're an American toy manufacturer. But what they like to do is go out of their way, find other developers, in this case Atlus, and then send them very horrible budgets at very short time spans and deadlines and say, hey, make us a game. They make the game, they confirm with other guidelines outside of their control. They then get the LGN logo and just plaster it on it, and they go, job well done, look what we did. This actually didn't stop, and it wasn't the only example of this either. Like, they got a hold of a lot of other games as well. They got a few really big names of the time, like Jaws, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and the X-Men, and obviously Friday the 13th. And at the end of the day, if you manage to get something on the same platform as the now famous Mario Brothers or Zelda, a lot of critique will be overlooked when placed on such a high pedestal. Brutal budgets and horrendous deadlines usually tarnish the end results in incredibly repetitive, mediocre games. But despite the mundane finished results, the company still gets a lot of hate for its overall quite greedy business practice, as it is all boiled down to obtain something marketable, make a cheap, quick game, and then sell to their massive amounts of loyal fans. And whilst Friday the 13th does take place in the iconic Camp Crystal Lake, like it does in the movies, but it has a ton of random mechanics thrown in, like crows or random zombies that attack the player, all of which seem to only ever take place inside this game, and never once is the case in any of the outer layers of this IP. This makes absolutely no sense until you realise the red Italian elephant in the room. Nintendo prides itself in being extremely marketable towards children and families, hence why you see the lack of iconic weapons like the axes or any sort of melee weapon that you could cause any intense bleeding with, and in this instance Jason bears no weapon at all, and the occasional haymaker will do. Also, words like kill have been completely removed from the text too. You're going to have to settle for defeating Jason and not killing him, because God forbid that you kill the serial killer in this game made for children that's from a film that is rated for adults. It's a mess, but unfortunately one of the best products LGN has ever had a hand in creating. In fact, Atlus could probably have made a much better end result if only the budgeting and the deadline wasn't so harsh. I mean, unlike LGN, they're actually still a functioning company and are now most well for creating the Persona franchise. I mean, if there's anything good to take away from that product, the NES game of Friday the 13th, it is the cover art. The cover art is actually just beautiful. Before seeing another game variant of Friday the 13th, Jason was next seen in not his own game, but Mortal Kombat X in 2015.
Jason Voorhees.
As DLC alongside other classic movie stars like fellow slasher Leatherface and Freddy Krueger, even a feature from Predator and the Xenomorph as well, with 3 different playstyles, tons of references are rammed into Jason's kit and animations. From his iconic head tilt to the lightning that brings Jason back from the dead, the slasher, relentless or unstoppable class brings a change in moveset, making approaching the battle different. Slasher has more aggressive moves, with the addition of a machete throw proving to be a great ranged attack. Relentless makes Jason more evasive, making you more of a moving threat. Lake Mist now allows you to teleport behind enemy fighters. Unstoppable is probably the most crippling playstyle you can adopt. You kind of remove all of the possible combos that Jason can perform, and instead of that you actually just have an extended life. If you get killed in your battle, Jason will just get up again and start fighting. Similar to every character on the roster, Jason also gets his own ending at the end of beating a tower, which is really cool because he becomes the ultimate slasher, killer of all. Later he would be seen in a game called Friday the 13th Killer Puzzle, which was available on most consoles as well as iOS, but overall had some extremely basic mechanics, and its style was quite unfitting for the nature of the franchise. But finally, in 2016, a beta was announced by different developers and publishers for a true Friday the 13th experience. IllFonic and Gun Media came out with a Kickstarter to fund the development and creation of a new Friday the 13th game, which includes the help from some of the most important people from the original movie production. This included Tom Savini, Harry Mendfridini, Harry Mendfridini, I hope I'm saying that right, and also one of the most important, Sean S. Cunningham, the original director of the Friday the 13th, so things were looking really good for the franchise coming back to video game forms, because it has been quite a while. It gained tons of support from slasher fans, and backers received cameos in a virtual cabin, which was included in the game upon release. Popular YouTuber H2O Delirious is known for his hockey mask wearing persona, which makes him the second best mask slasher YouTuber out there, just under myself. But with his support and love for the game's development, it landed him his own in-game tombstone featuring a teddy sitting idle beside it, which is a reference to a reoccurring inside joke on his channel.
Okay.
I'm down.
Which way is the graveyard?
No!
I'm being chased!
No! It's your delirious
Okay,
die!
don't go to the graveyard.
Uh-oh.
Don't go to the
graveyard. He's near us.
You mentioned being a fan of this. There's a lot of fans of this. Talk about the authenticity in the game and how you're trying to honor the legacy of Friday the 13th.
Yeah, I mean, if you didn't know, we were a game called Summer Camp, and we were making an homage to Friday the 13th, and the license holders of Friday the 13th, Sean Cunningham, saw our game and gave us the license for free. That just doesn't happen, so we are already super fans. So we have Kane Hodder, who played Jason in 7, 8, 9, and X. He is Jason in our game. He did all the mocap. And all the kills were designed by Tom Savini. He's the most legendary special makeup effects artist in the world. We have Pamela Voorhees talking to you while you're playing as Jason. We even went as far as to track down blueprints of certain buildings, like the Higgins-Haven building from Part 3. That is in our game, and it's replicated perfectly.
Gameplay trailers was released, and this was the first time you would ever be able to roam Camp Crystal Lake as Jason Voorhees himself, so everyone was incredibly hyped for the beta. Keys were given to the Kickstarter backers alongside content creators in an attempt to promote the game, which proved to be a great success. IllFonic actually sold 1.8 million copies on Steam, which is impressive considering it was restricted to being only a digital product. It wasn't until October 13th of the same year did it actually become a tangible product. The game was a success, but especially among streamers and online content creators in general, as it featured proximity chat, which allowed players near each other in-game to interact with one another. This included the user controlling Jason, which made for some of the best interactions between two opposing parties. Due to its asymmetrical gameplay, it also became one of the first titles ever really to rival the style of Dead by Daylight, sparking conversation between the two fan bases on which one stood superior. The basis of an asymmetrical game is essentially a power shift between players and, in this case, two teams. Users who play as camp counselors are fragile and rely on the stamina bar, whilst also being able to lock doors or open windows. Items can be found in cabins or out in the wilderness to help them defend themselves from the player assigned to Jason, whose goal is to kill all of the players. The randomly selected player who is chosen to be Jason will spawn in his shack away from any POIs, but has no stamina bar. He can destroy electric boxes and doors whilst also collecting throwing knives in an attempt to provide some sort of ranged attack. Over time you will gain more abilities to utilise in your pursuit. The first is a simple teleport which allows you to shift to any location on the map with a decent cooldown between using it. Later you'll gain a chase ability that allows you to teleport more precisely and gain ground over people during an encounter. You'll also be able to scan the map for any players making enough noise with a little white dot that will be flashing. There's also a scan ability as well that highlights any moving players in red, and if they're in a cabin it will highlight the entire cabin in red, making them quite easy to find if they're being too loud and reckless. And then after a few more minutes have passed through the game, or once you've killed enough players, you'll then gain Rage. Rage allows you to basically just skip breaking animations. Instead of having to hack down slowly doors and walls to get in, you can walk through them instantly, making it even harder for any remaining people to survive. Campers can avoid detection by slowly navigating the map, walking slow, and listening to audio cues. If Jason teleports near you, you'll get a cue for it. There will be static on your screen, and there will also be a spark sound cue on your headphones. All of this mixed together with proximity chat was proving to be a massively popular, successful format. And at the time, proximity chat was quite new, so this was groundbreaking for a lot of people. For the following years, Friday the 13th the game would see new variants for Jason, customising the killer's experience with fresh new kill animations and cosmetic changes. One of the first and only skins added to the game was a recolor for Part 3 Jason, which coated him in his classic purple and cyan, clear reference to the original appearance he had in the NES game, even replacing the in-game music with an 8-bit cover. Also, if you were a Kickstarter, and back in the day you were supporting it before the game came out, you would have unlocked the Savini Jason, which is a trident-wielding flaming variant named after the actor himself, Tom Savini, which nowadays is one of the rarest cosmetic items to have legitimately in the modern day, because you could only obtain this in the Kickstarter in 2017. Other additions consisted of the new maps that included various locations from the movies, like Higgins Haven and Jarvis Residence. This also included smaller versions of the same maps, allowing smaller games amongst friends to be more balanced. Emotes were also added, which sparked the campus love for Katy Perry, because killing California girls was unforgettable. The best matches are the ones where you played last Friday night as a survivor, and you're the one that got away. Of course, as always, glitches would seep through the cracks, making games even more fun, even if it was straight up cheating. You could clip through certain walls or teleport onto rooftops to outright win the game. It was an incredibly unfair advantage, but hey, it was quite funny. With each camper comes individual strengths and weaknesses, all of which are better at certain tasks. You could play the more athletic characters in an attempt to outrun Jason, or the more intellectual types that could help players actually escape, which were more useful when it comes to repairing phone lines, electrical boxes, or disarming traps. Counsellors had a diverse array of skill points to use in-game to nullify or buff your character's traits. Perks like Grease Monkey allow you to repair and fill up cars faster, making getaways more efficient. Thick Skin grants you more resistance when taking swing or throwing knife damage, reducing the chance of becoming injured in the hunt. And just by naming those, you can kind of get a grasp on the sort of stuff you can get from these perks, and you can have 3 perks per counsellor, so that does mean there are a lot of builds that you could play around with. Other than what you bring into the game, you can find items in cabins to increase your chance of survival. Melee weapons like wrenches, pans, and fire pokers are the weakest kind with a low stun rate, but with a bat axe or machete you can stun lock Jason more efficiently. The machete also has a higher chance of breaking Jason's mask, which can be used in actually killing him, which wins the survivor's game instantly. This basically never happened, by the way. It required like you getting the sweater from Jason's hut, a male counsellor to hold a machete, maybe even only Tommy Jarvis, I can't remember exactly, but it was a very movie accurate thing that you had to do. So unless you had a team of 5 players all playing specific characters and one of you dying and coming back as Tommy Jarvis, it's not going to happen. One of the rarer items is basically a get out of jail free card, which is the red pocket knife. If you have one in your inventory, if you get grabbed by Jason, you can instantly get out of his grasp by stabbing him in the neck and running free, leaving him locked for like a few seconds. Ranged weapons like flare guns and shotguns instantly knock over Jason, leaving him incapacitated for a short period of time. But these cannot be reloaded and are dropped after a singular use. You could also, hilariously, accidentally, or most commonly, purposely instant kill your teammates because friendly fire is a thing. But after a comical amount of trolling, they actually removed this feature. Car keys, a battery and fuel are essential for repairing some of the cars on the map. By doing all these things and putting them together, you can then escape using said car, but you can be stopped by Jason if he gets in the way of the car's line of travel. Radio stations can be used to call Tommy Jarvis for help, which is the only type of respawning feature in the game, as whoever dies after Tommy Jarvis is called, they get a second chance as the character himself with a shotgun. Phone lines can be utilised to call the police, which shortens the game's runtime to 5 minutes. After 5 minutes have passed, the police will arrive at one of the multiple maps exits randomly, so reaching this point after 5 minutes will help you reach safely and make you essentially win the game as a singular character. Not everyone, but just you. The only other way to really escape, apart from the cars, the police, or any other way, is essentially just repairing the boat, which is very similar to repairing the cars, but instead of car keys, you're finding a propeller instead. You may remember that Friday the 13th the game had a lot of developers that worked on the original films. And that's great, but that didn't include someone, and quite frankly, he didn't like that much. Victor Miller is the original writer of the first Friday the 13th film, and he disapproved of his work being used in a game he wasn't associated with. I apologise for the lack of transparency in this part of the video. I've tried to write about this lawsuit multiple times, and it has always come out sounding so confusing. Basically, the quick, simple rundown of it is Victor Miller wrote the original Friday the 13th. So that includes all of Part 1. So Camp Crystal Lake, the main killer being Pamela Voorhees. That does not include Jason Voorhees. But because the game that he doesn't like, that everyone loved, includes Friday the 13th as the name of it, because he wrote that. Pamela Voorhees is in it, but not really mentioned that much, but I guess he probably claimed that as well. And Camp Crystal Lake are all things he named, so he decided, that's mine, we're taking it down. And he did. That's why the game is no longer in commission, and it has basically been shut down completely. So technically, Sean S. Cunningham, because he was the director of the other films, you know, could actually go out of his way to make a film about Jason Voorhees and call it Thursday the 15th, because whilst he doesn't own Friday the 13th, he owns Jason Voorhees. Post-editing cynic here, yes, he does own the idea and look of Part 3 Jason Voorhees, but not the name. So they couldn't use the name Jason Voorhees, but they could use a look-alike of Jason in a mask. There's like a really weird legal divide here, and it's strange how it's cut up. Essentially, Victor Miller owns Camp Crystal Lake, Friday the 13th, the Part 1, and Pamela Voorhees. Whereas the other people who made the game own Jason Voorhees. Once again, they own his likeness, not the name Jason Voorhees. They legally can't use that. So, yeah, it's so stupid. But that's essentially what I've got from it. That is very possibly quite wrong, because, like I've mentioned prior, there is so much of this lawsuit that you just can't find. I think I've spent about 2 months looking into different files. All I know is there was a disagreement, a legal issue, they shut down the game, that's why it's gone. Miller then went to win the rights of the name Jason Voorhees, Camp Crystal Lake, and Friday the 13th, all for being the writer of Part 1. This meaning, due to the inclusion of these trademarked items in Friday the 13th the game, they had to cease development entirely. IllFonic announced the game's closure, and the game became heavily discounted, as did all of the DLC's cosmetics, and eventually became unavailable to buy digitally on any platform. Later it would come off the shelves too, which meant obtaining this abandonware would become even more tedious. Offline modes still function, even as unpolished as it is, online multiplayer still worked if you could find a game, and locally you can still play with friends if they own the game, which at the moment in time, if you didn't already, is looking to be quite unlikely. And then the final patch released.
Mother is talking to you. Find them. Make them remember me, Jason. Make them remember.
The last update was the nail in the coffin. It brought everyone's account up to level 150, everyone who still had access to the game had everything, all Jason variants, all perks, and ultimately a digital playground with no rules. Lobbies now borderline unplayable, players hack and mod the matches into buggy messes that make your game crash whenever you get caught by Jason or pick up the wrong item. You can enter matches that exceed the player limits, with those who still try to play the game constantly leaving and rejoining the same open lobby, only to be met with sometimes even additional Jasons, like more than one person playing as Jason on the same lobby. On Steam, you can actually also verify your game files, so it does stop it from crashing more frequently, but it still is a bit janky. This game has, or had I guess, well it still does, but it doesn't really work anymore because of what I'm about to tell you, has proximity chat. And there is an item called the walkie-talkie, and as soon as you pick one up you can talk to anyone else that has a walkie-talkie. Though, because people are spamming music through the mic most of the time, I tend not to pick one up. For my own sanity. Oh yeah, I can't show you any of that previous clip, but there was a game I was in earlier where someone was literally playing quite explicit Pornhub audio. Oh, don't worry, the car's being ambushed by 2 Jasons. It's a fucking hit and run. Oh my god, they're both being executed. What is this? So, apparently I won the game. It said that I won. Does the game just never end? Because now there's 20 players. There used to be 15. He's just kind of chilling. Oh no, there is 2 Jasons. Okay. That's not normal. Cosmetics like Savini Jason, despite its rarity, seem to have also lost all of its value, as those who mod the game seem to have found a way to access it and just use it in-game, so it seems to be just as common as the error you get when the software shuts itself down. Offline mode and the virtual cabin proves to be the saving grace of what it once was, but the multiplayer experience can only really be enjoyed with friends in a local game now. Illfonic has moved on to creating other games, some being Predator Hunting Grounds, another asymmetrical multiplayer game, which is slowly facing the same fate, minus the lawsuit, despite it actually being kind of fun. But it also was sad to see Friday the 13th get replaced so quickly. As of January 2024, a Twitter account that goes by @GameResurrected was created in order to keep the remnants of the lost title for the sake of the fans who adore the games all completely for non-profit. As of writing this, they have 13k followers, which is not only the perfect number given the circumstances, it also shows the dedicated fan base that lives on even all these years later. The purpose of this account? To create a game in the same likeness of the now lost Friday the 13th the game, whilst using similar aesthetics, assets and atmospheres. There was artwork shown on what they were going for, but was instantly shut down by a large Hollywood law firm via a cease and desist letter stating the illegal use of copyrighted material. And after tracing back the names signed on that cease and desist letter, I found the person who wrote the letter to this Twitter account, and it led me to their law firm. And my god, their law firm defends stuff like Lord of the Rings and all these massive big budget like franchises and IPs. Like this small like account trying to back a lawsuited game would stand no chance, and it's so depressing. And now the silence we're getting from this account, unfortunately, isn't surprising.
Look what they did to you, Jason. Kill them.
The destruction of the modern Friday the 13th franchise is nothing short of depressing. The man behind the mask has been iconic throughout it all. But this is why I think he's so misused. Ever since the NES title in 1989, the murder celebrity has been repurposed and cut in ways that just don't fit his purpose at all. Nintendo regulations refined Jason into a non-threatening character, coated in bright colours, and was so incredibly non-violent. Puzzle game had violent animations, but the chibi nature of the style completely takes away from his horror factors, which is a strange way to depict one of the most prevalent slashing film stars in the horror genre. Friday the 13th the game's demise was so tragic because other than his appearance in MKX, there was finally a time he entered the game world and it was done correctly. But I doubt he'll be seen in such a way again, because now he's supposedly making an appearance in another title in 2024. Multiverses. The game with Bugs Bunny, Adventure Time, and Harley Quinn. Whilst there's nothing inherently wrong with this, it's just another example of how they seem to completely disregard the roots Jason came from by depicting him in what is mostly media targeted at younger generations. Post-editing cynic here, just want to quickly say, when I was writing that was when there was the data mining leaks of his appearance in Multiverses. But now, there are screenshots that have confirmed that he's going to be in the game. Question number 1, why is he so wide? He has never ever skipped chest day in his life, and also he's wearing Timbs. It's just like putting a kid's character into a horror film and expecting it to work. Don't say that the Winnie the Pooh horror film was good. It was not. It was shit. But although I feel all this time Jason has been kind of done dirty as a character, I spoke to a friend of mine and he said this.
I agree, but the problem is that it's pretty much been milk dry at this point, and as much as I hate to say this to my special boy Jason, maybe it's time for him to retire the whole murder thing now.
And unfortunately, as much as I want to disagree, I simply don't. If all the screen time I'm going to get from my favourite character is going to be in some over-the-top PG work for kids, I'm not going to complain, because I'm getting something. But it's still a really strange way for the franchise to end on that note, especially from the roots it came from and the amount of stuff that's happened over the years. But still, I will be missing Jason's prime. I'll be missing Friday the 13th at the game's prime. But I guess it is kind of fitting for a game called Friday the 13th to have such an unfortunate end.
Cynic.
Look at my shadow, I don't have legs.
What do you mean you don't have legs?
My
Oh,
shadow
someone
doesn't have legs.
screamed. Who was this?
Shit. That was me. I'll sell everybody out if you leave me alone. Hey, no.
Tempting offer, but I'm gonna take you first.
Take me on a date? Oh, that's so nice of you.
I'm not your type.
Yes, you are.
I know you're not.
I didn't know you were into dead people.
That's why I'm taking my chances!
They want to hurt you, Jason.
You spend most of the time being able to escape running into the door frame.
Oh, wait a minute. There's something I'm thinking.
Why?
There's something I'm thinking. Will you stop hitting me?
Fuck you!
You're a dick!
I can't move. Donate £1 a week to save this poor child. I've never had such a painful way of playing this game. This is the only way I can
watch
move.
this? Can you grab? I can see you swinging. Can you grab?
You can see us.
It's that closet right there.
Oh god. Are you fucking kidding me?
You can move.
If I grabbed, I would have been. Is he actually in there?
Yeah.
Yep.